Hello, listeners, and welcome to the first ever recording of the Ian and Carson podcast. We hope you're doing well today, and if you so need, take the time to get a drink or get something to eat. I am your host, Carson.
And I'm your other host, Ian.
And today we'll be delving into the supernatural.
Enjoy.
To begin our discussion, what do you think about the supernatural? What do you think, just general thoughts? What are your, not religious perspectives, but what are your spiritual perceptions of the universe?
I think supernatural is a very ambiguous term. When I think of it at first in our American society, it makes me think of things like superheroes, like they have superpowers, which of course I don't think has any basis in reality. It's just for the fun of storytelling. But supernatural in terms of religion and, other deities, I think it's a genuinely good toss-up in my mind because, well, for one, I think with all this science that we hear learning about today and the types of things we're discovering in humanity, it sort of disproves a lot of the stereotypically historical supernatural figures. But in another sense, a godlike figure who, in the Bible, it says God created earth. But maybe more modern understanding could be that God just created all of the physical properties of our universe. And that's not something that we can know or measure with science,
Right, there's intangible things about supernatural. See, the way I see things is that there's tangible things that we understand as the human species, and then there's things that we have absolutely no idea about.
Right.
Such as, the 90% of the Earth's oceans. I mean, that's a natural topic, right? But that's just kind of an analogy to describe, the depth of misunderstanding that we have when it comes to providing explanations to supernatural events. It's kind of cheesy to mention it, but it's the YouTube videos of ghost sightings and people it's a lot of those are fake. It's what if one of those was real?
We have no way of really knowing what we don't know.
Exactly. We don't know who posted the video. We don't know the intentions behind the person posting the video, although most of those are fake.
Yes. Clickbait titles.
Right. But it's that hypothetical question of what if one of those ghost sighting videos was actually in it?
Or what if there's been a ghost sighting that was not documented on a video or on YouTube?
Yeah, what if you saw it and the only proof that you had was that you saw it with your own two eyes, and you hoped people just didn't think you were crazy?
I think the fact
it's are you going crazy when you see something like that, or is it just you experiencing something and then other people being too skeptical of it?
Well, I think there's a difference between our human perception and the fundamental truth of the universe. And we can only even experience so much of that fundamental truth with our own senses. We can only see the visible light spectrum. Right. But there's so much more wide variety of wavelengths that exist. I think even just the fact that we know so little about our own oceans on our Earth, let alone the vast expanses of the universe, speaks to the wide variety of potential supernatural beings or whatever else could exist in the universe that are possible. We simply can't have the answer, so we make up our own answers to, I guess, help us feel better about what truly does exist.
Right, because certainty provides more relief than uncertainty.
Right.
100% of the time. But that's an interesting point of discussion. Is a lot of people talk about supernatural things or intellectually ambitious conversations. If I could phrase it that way, I guess. But
I think so.
But it's like you're saying, we don't even have an understanding of the natural world. Things that we can test through science. We haven't even seen the depths of the Earth's oceans because of physical limitations.
Right.
Submarines physically will collapse under the pressure of, the water pressure just closing in on itself.
Right. Because we can only observe things with our own five senses, and we have to convert things that we can't observe into things that we can observe through our five senses, there will always be natural limitations to the things we can test with science and prove to ourselves truly exist. At the most fundamental truth of the universe. We can test that wavelengths outside of the visible light spectrum exist, but we don't even know if the things we can't test.
Yeah, the things we can't test, how do you claim that as an objective fact? Like, the only way that you can advocate for the existence of a supernatural occurrence is by seeing something with your own eyes and hoping that you don't misinterpret what's going on. Like, you're not just going crazy. Like, you know, and that's interesting too, because like that kind of segues into the discussion of like dreams and people's ability for supernatural things. Like, personally, I believe that people do have the potential to be divine mediums, and that's like not really based in anything logical. I just base that off of my like own subjective understanding of life.
Right, it's
like,
just a conclusion that we may want to believe in ourselves to help us feel better about what we can prove.
Right, like I've had dreams where I see a place and then I experience that place in the future.
As have I.
Relative to like the thing that I saw in my dream. I get deja vu and I'm like, what the hell just happened? Like, it's like I already saw this sort of thing, and it, you know, it kind of makes you, you know, think to yourself, like, to what extent do we not know the nature of the universe? Like, our dreams are just a segue into things we don't understand. Like, dreams providing prophetic knowledge to people. Like, if you've ever heard of ayahuasca and its effects, like DMT, like the molecule, particle, whatever, DMT, that people can ingest into their body, has been found through subjective experiences and legends and stories to be able to provide prophetic ability to certain people. Shamans in Nepal and like all of these rural areas in like East Asia and, you know, so on and so forth. Like, there's testimonies, you know, stories of people going to shamans for spiritual guidance. They ingest ayahuasca and then provide like what can only be described as supernatural understanding or knowledge about that person's life. And it's like, it's crazy, because to what extent do humans actually interpret the nature of reality?
I think it's also equally possible that ingesting such substances could bring out some sort of, like, it's a question of, are the things that the so-called supernatural deities telling us merely just a part of ourselves that are being projected through some sort of hallucinations or something that we're getting from those substances?
Mm-hmm.
Or are they telling us information that we could not have possibly already known without having gone to those places?
In other words, our own imagination is contributing to like what could just be considered a lucky guess. Like, you know, it's like, it was kind of like that one thing on South Park. I forgot what it was, but it was like the dude who was just like basically a false prophet. He went on TV and like he was like, "Oh
his
yeah,
name
you."
Is,
I forgot what his name.
He's the biggest douche in the universe.
Yeah. It was like,
what's his name?
I think you're having some marital problems.
Can't remember his name.
It's like, how did you know?
Because he's speaking in front of an audience full of hundreds of people and saying anything at all is going to get a reaction from someone.
I'm sensing someone in the audience is having marital problems. Is that right? Oh, that's me. Oh, come up to the...
Supernatural beings must have told him. How else would he have known that I was having marital problems?
Exactly. He was divinely inspired. Otherwise, he wouldn't have known that out of the thousands of people in the Oprah audience, that one of them was having some marital problems. Like,
right. But I think going back to the substance thing, where people claim to have had supernatural interactions, right?
Mm-hmm.
We can't prove whether or not that is a supernatural interaction they encountered, mm-hmm. or that it's just a part of their subconscious brain and their subconscious understanding of themselves finally finding a way to come out and be heard.
Yeah, the objectivity of that experience will never ever be falsified.
Right.
Like, it will never, well, maybe not falsified is the word, but it will never be proven. Like, it will never be, you can't write down on a scientific study that, yes, if you ingest ayahuasca or DMT or a hallucinogenic particle, that you actually have, like, you know, you can write it on paper and say, I talked to God. Like, that doesn't even make sense. Like,
we don't know. It could be coming from our own brain just as easily, and I think probably more likely. But again, there's no way to prove. Because let alone our oceans and the greater universes, we don't even understand our own minds.
Right.
And the way our brains physically function.
Our own minds are more understood, in my mind, than the physical nature of reality. Like, we understand more about the oceans than we do about, like, subconscious perception and, like, near-death experiences. We might as well just be, like, throwing a dart at the dartboard and hoping that it lands somewhere. Like, because it's like, you can't really... It's like trying to throw a dart at the dartboard, but you can't see it. Like, right. You're just kind of hoping that it hits. Like, it's... Like, how can
you're kind of hoping that it's even a dartboard. It could very much exactly. Just be, like...
It could just be, like, cocky.
It could just be cocky, exactly.
Yeah, literally.
I think that's a nice segue into another thing that I wanted to talk to you about, which was, if you take a shit, are you committing a sin? I know... I think just going off of the cocky thing.
Yeah, I think that's relevant.
Is shit offending a supernatural being should one exist?
I mean, personally, shit offends me. I hate when people shit.
Right. Especially in front of me.
Yeah, it's really annoying. Like, you were just walking down the street, someone takes a shit, like... Oh, yeah. That's rude.
And you can smell that kind of stuff. Like,
totally.
It stinks up our streets. It just lowers the quality of life for everyone in the area.
Exactly.
Right.
Like, please stop.
That part we know is offensive.
Like, if you're listening to this podcast, please stop pooping.
Just in general, even. Because it's one thing to shit in the street, but the question is it truly a sin against whatever religion you may believe, or just against the greater good of all humanity, to take a shit in a private setting somewhere like a toilet?
See, two things for me, mainly, is that, one, pooping in and of itself is, like, worse than flushing non-disposable baby wipes down the toilet.
Oh, like, absolutely.
It's like, that is, in my mind, equivalent to murder.
Oh, for sure. I couldn't agree more. I mean...
Like, what's the difference between taking a shit in front of someone and then brutally stabbing them?
Well, if you think about it...
There's no difference from a fundamental standpoint. You're committing a sin, and God frowns upon that.
Right. Even in just biblical times, there were 11 commandments. I don't know the first 10, but I know that for a fact that the 11th one is, do not take a shit in front of thy neighbor.
Yeah, I might have read that in the Quran or something, but... no, it said something like that in the Quran. It was like...
I'm not too well versed on the Bible.
It was like, don't take a shit, don't try to have material aspirations, right. Things like that. Like,
love thy mother and father.
Just basic things people should understand.
Right.
Like, and then, number 2 that I was going to talk about is like...
Number 2?
Yeah, my bad. I'm sorry, I said a curse word.
It's okay. That's what we're talking about today. Number 2 is maybe a little bit touchier of a way, more offensive to say the word shit. But
numero dos.
You didn't even realize you did it. You were just listing the...
And that's the thing, too, is like, the word poop.
Right.
If I can just say that in a way where it's like I'm not cursing.
Right.
Like
I think that's understood on this podcast.
It's like when, it's like when you're reading, To Kill a Mockingbird, and then your teacher makes you say the N-word in front of the class. Like,
right.
That sort of thing.
Those were some of the scariest times.
Oh, absolutely. Saying the N-word and saying the word poop are like, honestly, I think poop is kind of worse.
I think we may need to just go about calling it the P word in society.
Yeah, I'll reference it as the P word because I feel my mouth getting dirtier as I say it.
Right. I think a potential historical reason for us calling the N-word the N-word, but poop instead of... See, now I'm feeling it too. I need to start calling it the P word.
Like, you feel like your mouth is full of the P word.
I really do.
Yeah.
I really do. I'll maybe go back to saying shit because...
Yeah, I might say shit for a more, like, colloquial
it's a more politically correct version.
Yeah, it's just a more colloquial expression that people can, it's like... I would teach my children to say shit over poop.
Right.
But, numero dos. I think the only exception to the P word being a bad thing is Kim Jong-un. I think it's actually okay if he does it.
I think so too. And that brings about another question. Like, he's a potential living example of a supernatural deity.
That's a good point too, is like, just like you were saying, like, supernatural sort of thing, it's like, he is one of the world's, like, potential supernatural deities, because he says that he has never done the P word before.
Right.
And honestly, he's kind of on the same page with us about that sort of thing. It's like pooping is wrong.
He thinks it's a sin, and he sees it as a sin in the same way that we do, for
Exactly.
potentially different reasons.
That's why he doesn't do it.
That begs the question, if historically someone like Kim Jong-un and someone like us, who were both raised in Western culture off of biblical religions, if we both seem to find the P word as such a brutal sin on the same level as stabbing someone in the head, do you think it could be possible that two different cultures not just came to that same conclusion naturally, but were expressed that conclusion by a supernatural deity?
I think that the supernatural deity is probably Kim Jong-un himself.
So how long do you think he's been around in that case?
A little while.
I'd say he has been around for a little while.
He's probably been around for at least 50 years.
I think that's a long time.
Yeah.
I mean, compared to, I haven't been around for 50 years, so
right.
That's at least half of my lifetime.
Yeah, no, that's I'm only 90? So that's more than half of my life.
Exactly, me too.
So
I don't even know how old I am. Somewhere in the ballpark, though.
Yeah, that's pretty wild. So, I mean, I think we've said pretty much all of the things, you'd want to touch about, touch on a sort of conversation. We've talked about the moral implications of pooping. Oh, my bad.
It's okay. We all understand here that that's what we're discussing today, and it's an educational environment. So.
Yeah. That, we've talked about this existence of the supernatural, its intangibility, what we can and cannot understand about physical reality.
I'd say one more question that we didn't quite come to the conclusion with, though, is just concerning this P word and the supernatural. If we're being realistic, living in the United States, the average person, we'll say shits. It's a more polite word. The average person takes a shit 1 to 2 times a day. That's a lot of sins being committed. If there was a supernatural deity, would they be getting pissed off by now?
Well, you know what the fact that shitting is a sin, what's interesting about that is that in Western culture, more people take a shit every day than any other culture in the world.
It's also true that in Western culture, more people take a shit every day than people are brutally stabbed in the head every day.
Exactly. There's a correlation.
But nowhere in the Bible does it say that brutally stabbing in the head is expressly worse or better than taking a shit. They're both sins in the eyes of God.
Right. That's in the Quran too.
Right.
Allah expressively states in literally the first book of the Quran, it says, if you take a shit, you are immoral.
Right. I mean, and even Kim Jong-un
understands that. It says it right
that.
there. Kim Jong-un is on the same page.
All of humanity, seemingly. So why is it done so frequently? Has America just lost touch with its innermost values?
That's why I was going to segue into it. I think American culture, Western culture is actually satanic. It all comes full circle. You know how people were talking about, there were the halftime shows where Beyonce and Jay-Z would throw up triangles and stuff like that. It's all connected. And how it's connected is that the way people think population control is being implemented in the United States, people think that it's the LGBTQ movement is that sort of thing. But I think it's
drag queens and
I think
critical race theory.
Right.
I think the more likely thing, though, I think what you're getting at is it's shitting. And it's probably what the government is feeding us in our food. Let's be realistic. Capitalism in America has led to a monopolization of the food industry by a few big giants.
And the shit industry.
That's one and the same. They're probably feeding us things that are leading to us shitting every single day.
Synonymous. Fiber, sugar.
Exactly.
All of this is and not only is it just more shitting, not only is it the frequency of shitting increasing, but
the quality of shitting.
The quality of shitting isn't even good.
It's not.
It's all of the food that we eat in the United States is going to cause you not only to shit more, but to have a worse time doing it.
Right. That's why South Park, going back to South Park, commented on Chipotle, which is one of these big monopolizations of food industries in America.
One of the biggest satanic industries in the United States.
Exactly. And South Park hinted at some commentary about this by creating this fake product called Chipotle, which cleaned the bloodstains out of your underwear every time you took a shit. Just the fact that people would even think such a product is necessary and, in my opinion, rather useful, just begs the question, are those companies really putting things in our food to lower our quality of shitting and make us shit more? And if so, is it because they're working with Satan?
It's obvious to me, like with the existence of the Illuminati showing up in, Super Bowl sorts of things, like halftime performances, like music videos. Like there was even an instance of Katy Perry in her Dark Horse video, like the music video for Dark Horse that got like more than 1 billion views on YouTube. Why did it get so many views? Is because people love to sin and people love to shit.
Right.
And what shows up in that video? The Illuminati.
The triangle.
Yeah, the Eye of Ra, I think, shows up in that video. Like Egyptian, what's the word? Hieroglyphics, like alluding to the existence of the Illuminati, like throwing up triangles and stuff like that. It's all full circle. If people didn't shit, then the American consumerist industry that's, consuming our society wouldn't even be able to function.
Right, exactly. And since it's such a fundamental part of all of our lives, it's this cycle it's this horrible, inescapable reality that we can't get away from.
It's a negative feedback loop.
It is. We need it to survive in our culture.
Right. Why? Because they feed it in our food. It's like if you moved to Singapore, you'd find out really quick that people don't shit there.
Right.
Like, it's because of the food. People don't get fed things like fiber and sugar and all of these horrible substances in Singapore. They just get like water. So and that's all you really need to survive.
That also leads to the Kim Jong-un point, because he claims not to shit, and we don't know whether or not that's true. But
the fact that he doesn't want to, already insinuates that he's he's on the same page as us as far as things are concerned.
Exactly. But the question there is then, because the Bible tells us shitting is a sin, but in American culture, we go back to the Bible so frequently for so many other points of our daily lives, things that, tell us our morals. So why is it that we're okay with the Bible telling us so many things, but ignoring what it says about shitting?
Well, I mean, it's just like the Bible says. It's like people love sin. It's an inherent part of human nature, and that's why we need Allah to forgive us.
But if it's such an inherent part of human nature, then why is it that Americans love sin so much, but people in Singapore and North Korea, for example, found ways to get away with it without needing to shit? Do they commit other sins, perhaps, that fill that same sort of void in their lives?
Yes.
And if so, what kinds of things might those be?
I think every country is different as far as like the sorts of taboo sorts of things, like the sins that are mentioned in the Bible, like for instance, polygamy or homosexuality, those sorts of things.
Right.
Like that's existent everywhere, but in different sorts of frequencies. Like it's like in Singapore, people don't shit. Like everybody knows that, but also in Singapore, like people drink beer and people drink alcoholic beverages, which are morally wrong.
But the thing is, also in Singapore, they have such strict laws for any sort of drug possession whatsoever, which is interesting because the Bible doesn't say anything about heroin or crack cocaine. Right. And yet in Singapore, those things are so blatantly illegal that you can be killed or sent to prison for life just for possession of them.
In my mind, heroin and crack are okay. Like, because in the Bible, in the Quran, like in spiritual texts, like, where does it ever say that you can't do heroin? Where does it ever say you can't ingest DMT? And segueing back to the supernatural conversation, DMT being, a way of people opening their third eye and having stories to tell about divine, divine influences, divine encounters, that sort of thing. Like, it's like society is oriented in a way to brainwash us to be disempowered. Like, if you're familiar with QAnon, you know, like...
Unfortunately.
Yeah, it's, you know, it's like things like that. It's like those sorts of conspiracies are being thrown around as ways to mislead people about the real things that are going on. Like the pooping epidemic.
It's okay.
God, I'm so sorry.
We're here having a conversation about it.
I'm so fucking shitting sorry, dude.
It's fucking shitting okay. I really do understand, Carson. And that's why we're talking about these things, because I honestly do believe that if we label certain words as being too offensive or too harsh for audiences to hear, then we're letting those words have power over us. And that just lets the words live on, having this power that we don't want them to have.
That's a good point.
The reason we don't say them is because they have this power that we give them by not saying them.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Poop being a prime example. I'll just say it. I'm not going to let my mouth feel dirty saying the word poop anymore, just because who decided that word needed to be derogatory?
It's words have their inherent, you know, they have their inherent meanings, and within this, you know, sort of cultural or discussive context that we put the word poop inside of, I feel safe saying that now. Thank you, Ian.
Yeah.
You know, it's like these words are just words that we use to describe certain physical things that are happening, and in and of themselves, if we're discussing them, they can't be offensive. Like,
right.
You know, but, you know, going back to the original sort of discussion, like, it's like society is oriented in a way where they want to dumb down the population either by, you know, like using things like Cocomelon as ways of like indoctrinating children into believing horrible things.
Right, or Twitch streamers.
Twitch streamers, that's another big one.
Yeah.
Those are also people who are big proponents of pooping,
right.
And that's like, you know, the pooping epidemic in and of itself is like just like COVID, invented by, you know, people living in the Arctic.
Right.
You know, it's like COVID was just made up by people living in fucking Antarctica.
The North Pole, if you will.
Right.
Or the South Pole. Either which could contain Santa Claus, by the way. Another person who could potentially be a living example of a supernatural deity. And we just don't know. But that brings us back to the Bible. And the thing is, if we're living so closely by the Bible's word in American culture for so much of a percentage of our population, but the Bible is a book that says the words shit and cum and piss like every 5 words. Why
debatably more than the word God or love.
I think so too.
Like,
if we have any viewers listening to this, go through the Bible and see, word for word, whether shit, piss, and cum make up a higher percentage of the actual text of the Bible than the words like God and love do.
And you know what's interesting is that the things that need to be talked about the most in our modern society are neglected to be talked about in Christian circles today.
Right.
Because where do you find the usages of the word poop?
Right.
And Satanism the most?
Right.
In the book of Enoch. Where's the book of Enoch in modern biblical canon? Non-existent.
Right.
It's like the biblical canon was corrupted by people who, you know, throughout all of history, there were people in the beginning of, you know, the upbringings of society and civilization that have decided, like, how to dumb down the population. It's like biblical canon is one of them. The book of Enoch exclusively says multiple times, if you poop, you are sinning. And it doesn't show up a lot of times in the, you know, in the rest of the Bible, but
it's still there.
It's still there. It's part of the Bible, and like,
it should be taken as a whole. And I think that sort of picking and choosing is so prevalent in our American society. Like, choosing, some people with their redneck agendas choose parts of the Bible to be okay, like where it says love thy neighbor and mother and father, but where it says homosexuality is immoral, that's what they choose to use as part of their agenda.
Like,
or they pick and choose. Homosexuality should be wrong, but pooping is acceptable. And we can see that across our society. So many people poop so frequently. And yet, so many people also view homosexuality as immoral.
Like, when did we get so wrong in American society that we put pooping on the same, like, moral plane as kissing someone. They're both sins.
Right. Brutally fist-fucking someone is just as bad as pooping.
Like, honestly, like, brutally fist-fucking a person against their will, like, can you say that's the same or worse than pooping? I don't think so.
I mean,
like,
which has affected your life more? Have you known more people who have been frequent poopers or who have brutally fist-fucked people just for amusement?
Right.
Clearly, pooping plagues our society so much more heavily.
Mm-hmm. Pooping is an epidemic. It, like, destroys septic tanks. It, it ruins people's lives. It's
the most annoying fucking thing.
It takes away from the time you spend with your family.
It does.
Like, the time that you waste pooping and sinning is time that you could have spent loving your family.
Think how much physical time the average father figure in an American household spends on the toilet. It's not just squeezing out the shit and flushing it down the toilet.
Mm-hmm.
They sit there on their phones, potentially reading things like the Bible, reading it tell them to not be pooping as they're doing it. And they spend sometimes hours on the toilet.
Oh, honestly,
away from their families, away from the hard work, from the cooking and cleaning that they should be doing, just to squeeze the shit out of their assholes into the toilet.
Yeah, and it's like, not only is it taking that time away from their family, but it's like, it's a segue into other sins, like
right.
pornography,
right.
Segues into, playing games on your phone.
Right. 168%.
Playing games on your phone is a sin too. Like smiling while you're playing games on your phone, you're being immoral, you're sinning, like you're destroying septic tanks, you're taking time away from your own family. Like,
you are creating the most abominable potential object known to man.
If it's like, I'll put it this way, if Satan could stare you right in the face and you wouldn't know it, that's what Satan looks like. Satan comes in the form of pooping. Satan comes in the form of, playing games on your phone, wasting time. Like, time that could have been spent preaching to people about the dangers of pooping. It's like, all of those things are connected. The Illuminati,
right.
like the corruption of society,
and
immorality.
Yet we see people...
It's like sin is inherent to human nature, and it's like staring us right in the face. And what do people do? They just do it anyway. They poop like it's not even a problem.
Well, what do some people do? They stand on the corner of the street and they preach to people about the Bible and the things they should be listening to. But you don't ever hear those people talk about pooping. Mm-hmm. That's not something from the Bible that they ever mention. And yet they're outside preaching almost every day. We're in Columbia, South Carolina today. And in front of the state capitol, there's always people preaching the Bible. And yet I've talked to them multiple times. And has our conversation ever tackled the pooping issue in America? No.
Absolutely not. Why? It's because people choose to be immoral. Like, even preachers, like, we are all guilty of sin. It's like, I talked with my priest the other day about, this sort of thing. And, he told me, he was like, pooping is something that I could do better about. I've been pooping a little bit. And, I told him, that's okay. You're one of the most, respected religious figures in my life. And so,
it's okay to commit sin, but for it to be so widespread across our population is just another question.
Well, it's okay to commit a sin unknowingly and then repent for it.
Right.
It's like, just like pooping or kissing or playing games or anything.
Especially Fruit Ninja.
Oh, Fruit Ninja? Don't even get me started.
It's a whole nother podcast, but...
Yeah, that's for another, that's for another day, but...
I think maybe a potential solution to this whole thing, though, is I'm Jewish, so I don't really know that much about the Bible and all we've been talking about, but I do know that in certain parts of Christianity, there's this time of year called Lent, where people give up a certain thing. Could people give up pooping during that time? If they identify it as an issue that truly does plague their lives, and plague the lives of tons of people throughout this country, is that something they'd be willing to give up during Lent? And would that be beneficial to our population?
You know what I think, Ian? I think what would help people, on that same sort of, train of thought is the idea of butt plugs. Like, have you ever heard of those?
I've heard of Jesus being butt plugged.
Yeah, me too. Read that in the book of Ezekiel. Jesus said, butt plug thy neighbor. But, seriously, if you butt plug someone, how are they supposed to poop?
But does that create the problem of poop being backed up in their bodies, And I'm sure that's totally fine until they inevitably release the butt plug. And then a waterfall of shit just comes out of their asses. And what happens to their bathrooms? What happens to society when more people start producing that much shit at once? Could our septic tanks even handle that quantity?
To get rid of poop, you just have to repent. That the butt plug is there to prevent you from committing the moral act. It's like if you were biting your fingernails and you were trying to stop, when people put that, not adhesive, but that bad tasting stuff on their fingernails.
Right, shit, you mean.
Yeah, when you put shit on your fingernails to stop you from, biting your fingernails, it's a butt plug is there to remind you that it's wrong.
Right.
And repenting is the way to get rid of that shit from your life.
But that begs the question.
In the most literal and metaphorical way.
Right. But the thing is, America, the United States of America as a country, was founded on this principle that no one religion would be the king religion, that anybody could believe anything they want. So for people who don't live by the Bible and don't know about the existence of butt plugs, what can they do to stop shitting? How can they learn? Because everyone in America knows it's a sin, Christian or not, but Bible or not. But these people, if they don't know about the existence of butt plugs, for example, or they don't know the ways to repent in the eyes of the Lord about their shitting and their sinning, what can they do?
Well, there's a lot of commonality across religious texts about butt plugs particular to that religious faith. For instance, where in Western culture we're familiar with Christian butt plugs.
Right.
But you can go to Target and you can actually purchase Quran inspired.
Even at Target, really?
Yeah. No, at Target you can you just have to look behind the toilet paper. If you dig really far back there, you can find Quran themed butt plugs, Hindu butt plugs, the butt plugs inspired by the Vedas.
What about the Torah?
Yeah, there's Torah butt plugs.
Because I'm Jewish, and that's not even something I've ever used. I found other methods of plugging my butt in the past, but if I had known butt plugs existed,
none that are safe.
Right, and that's the question.
Yeah, how do you safely and effectively get rid of as much sin as possible in society, in the world?
Right, and a lot of people think it's greater policing or more militaristic types of police, which is a huge problem, and it leads to so much killing of innocent people. Yeah,
police brutality, education.
Right, that type of thing eliminates certain kinds of sins, though, like brutally murdering someone with stabbing them in the head. But no matter how much policing we have, we just don't seem to be able to eliminate the shitting problem in America. Right. Even on the streets.
Because people from different religious faiths just can't get on the same page. Some people, come from an Islamic background and some people come from a Christian background. It's how do you get both of those people to plug their assholes?
And yet we all know, no matter our background in this country, that shitting is immoral.
Yeah,
it's a sin.
Across the board.
Everybody seems to agree, and yet we can't all come up with one answer. We have answers for the food industry. We all have monopolized these companies. We have monopolizations of other industries as well because of the capitalism in America. And yet, a common butt plug across all these religions is not something that exists.
Right. One universal butt plug to bring people together is something that I think would really help with the epidemic of sin in the United States.
Do you think
specifically in the United States, probably implemented in a different way in other countries?
Do you think in the same way that the internet interconnects so many people in this country, we could have one intertwined butt plug with cables. I mean, we have cable and electricity systems that go to almost every household in America. Do you think a butt plug could be added to that type of thing to connect us all together and get us on one common mode of butt plugging?
I think that would be possible but impractical. And the reason why is because, it's like, as much as that would be an effective idea, I certainly do think that would be an effective idea. I don't think it would be sustainable economically, because you would have to create a wiring system for the universal butt plug that would reach every single home.
Right.
And that would be, very hard to do. It's just, it's kind of just like walking door to door and just telling people about it, or it's, it's like that sort of attitude about it. Like when you see someone in Walmart, when you see, someone at Target, if they look like the kind of person that would be misinformed about this sort of thing, you just have to, preach the good word, and like
right.
get people on the same page. And it's like, it's not just pooping that's a problem. It's like all of these other sins, like kissing people. It's like, it's everywhere.
Right.
People do it in public. That's disgusting.
It's truly sickening.
People playing games on their phone while they're driving.
Even Fruit Ninja.
People pooping in their cars while they're driving.
Yeah.
People playing Fruit Ninja in their cars while they're driving.
I mean, they poop on their seats and out their windows into the streets. Even through their sunroofs.
It wouldn't surprise me if a person was driving, they looked over at their fiance and then gave them a kiss.
Oh no.
Sin comes in so many different ways, Ian.
It does.
And it's just everywhere, and people don't even know.
And the thing is, that sort of kissing while driving or pooping while driving is even more prevalent in our society than murdering each other while driving.
It's everywhere.
And yet, and we all recognize it to be sinful. Religion to religion, it doesn't matter. That's something that everyone in America understands.
Hindu, Islamic, beliefs, like Christian beliefs, like all of the religious texts are on the same page as far as that's concerned. But at the individual level, we have to take responsibility for the sins that we commit in our daily life.
Right.
And we have to acknowledge where they're coming from. And, making a more thoughtful conversation. It's like, why have I been pooping recently? Is it because of the food that I'm eating? Do I need to change something about my diet?
Another part of that question
is, do I need to get a butt plug for myself? Like, it's like, you have to find ways of keeping yourself accountable, not just for pooping, but for all sorts of sins, like lying or, stealing or, killing your neighbor, that sort of thing. Like, it's like you have to keep yourself accountable for it.
Another part of that question is, why is it that we sin in those ways so often, but you don't see the kind of stabbing people in the head nearly as often in America? And I think that has to go back to the Constitution and the laws that we created when we founded this country. I don't think anywhere in the Constitution it actually says anything about stabbing people in the head. And yet, there are multiple different laws in the Bill of Rights that expressly state that shitting is immoral and should not be tolerated in America. Right. And it's the same sort of picking and choosing that we do with the Bible, where we base all of our arguments off of these different texts that we have, and yet we don't actually take the time to read them and see what they say.
There's no accountability.
We don't know. The average person walking on the street in Columbia, South Carolina, doesn't know that shitting is just as immoral as stabbing someone in the head. That could even be surprising to them to hear for the first time.
Right.
That's just not how they were raised.
Debatably worse than murdering someone.
Right.
Again, like you were saying earlier, it's like, how much are you affected by murder in your day-to-day life? Barely, like 0 to none.
For 99% of this population, it's not something that we've had to worry about very much in our own lives.
If you're alive, then that means that you have not been murdered.
Right.
And that means you haven't been affected by that type of sin in your life. But pooping is something that people get tempted to do every single day, multiple times a day. Worse than pornography. It's an epidemic on...
Worse than kissing, even, in some instances.
Oh, definitely.
Even worse than Fruit Ninja.
Even worse than Fruit Ninja.
I think another important question that we have to tie this back to is, with the supernatural and with butt plugs, what kind of butt plug does Kim Jong-un use as someone who's a very likely supernatural being living here amongst us as a human, and someone who claims to never poop? He must have an extremely powerful butt plug. What does that look like? Where did he get it from?
You know what I think about that? I think that Kim Jong-un, just like Siddhartha Gautama, otherwise, colloquially known as the Buddha,
Right.
or Jesus Christ.
Right. Any one of these father figures of a huge group of people.
Yeah, like, all of these religious, spiritual leaders, like, it doesn't look like they're walking around with butt plugs in their ass. And why is that? It's because they're holy beings. People that understand that, it's like Jesus was an example of a person that didn't need a butt plug because he was the Son of God. And, what that means is that he doesn't need a system of accountability for himself to not poop because, like, he just doesn't do that. Like,
yet, what was the very first person that I mentioned when we started talking about butt plugs? It was Jesus Christ.
Mm-hmm.
That's the first person that everybody thinks of. It's one of these misconceptions in our society. Like, why is it that so many people in America believe that Jesus Christ has had a butt plug, and yet we don't model ourselves after him?
Mm-hmm.
Even in reality, he didn't have a butt plug. But it still says in the Bible and in all of the writings and throughout history that we should use them.
Yeah, well, it's the simple answer is that we're not God. We're not the Son of God. So it's like we need systems of accountability to not sin, and Jesus does not. Like, even the Buddha is a person that likely used a butt plug. It was never exclusively mentioned in the Buddhist texts. It's like Confucianism, Shintoism, that sort of thing. It's like it wasn't explicitly mentioned, but it's like at that time, at the time period, historically, like certain people just didn't poop because they were enlightened.
I mean, you saw Buddha sitting under a tree for 20 years or whatever it was in that religion.
Mm-hmm.
That would be a pretty easy and convenient position to keep a butt plug in your asshole for so long.
Yeah, and if you're sitting under a tree for 20 years, what are you not doing? You're not
eating.
Eating, exactly. And if you're not eating, you can't poop.
Exactly. It's impossible. Particularly if you're not eating the Americanized foods that our society feeds us. But even in places like Singapore,
mm-hmm.
where they eat godly foods,
mm-hmm.
some people still find ways to shit.
Yeah, because, they have food imported from different countries.
And it's just that they have this yearning desire, this urge in the deepest part of their being to commit sin. And that's one way that they know how.
One thing that I really like about Singaporean culture is that, like, in regards to certain kinds of sinning, like having bad grades in school and pooping, they're starting to implement more corporal punishment, those sorts of measures to make sure people don't do that sort of thing.
Even with pooping.
Yeah, like, what's the crime rate in Singapore? One of the lowest in the entire world.
Right.
Why? Is because their systems of discipline and their, integrity when it comes to, moral and religious discipline. But, like, at the same time, it doesn't mean that they're without fault or that they don't have secret, like, little clubs of sin that exist in those countries that still need to be acknowledged and talked about.
The question is, though, are they prohibiting these kinds of sins via this militaristic policing and this crackdown that they've done against all these just different illegal drugs that manage to still somehow find ways in the country?
Mm-hmm.
Or is it something else that they use to eliminate this sort of shitting problem?
I mean,
because it still happens even with their kinds of food. People will always find ways to shit.
Right, just like gun violence in the United States. Like, people will always find ways to sneak in guns to states that exclusively prohibit certain kinds of ownership of,
Right, and that doesn't mean that those laws that prohibit those guns don't make things better. They certainly will make things safer just because it makes it more difficult. And
100%. Like,
just with
less
drugs, though.
Public access to things that could be potentially dangerous, like
Right.
like an AK-47 or pooping, for instance. It's like when you... Like, we don't really have laws in the United States that prohibit pooping, and that's why it's so widespread.
Mm-hmm.
But
even more widespread than AK-47 ownership, which is also something that's legal for some reason.
The real question to ask, Ian, I think, is that how do you get people to really see pooping as a sin? Like,
right.
Because that's the root of the issue, is not the fact of, like, oh, we'll just outlaw it and make it, something taboo, something that people can't get their hands on as easily. the real way to acknowledge this problem in the United States is to just confront it at its core. We, as people, are sinners. We make mistakes, and we sin against God in little ways like that. And we just, like, if people aren't knowledgeable about that, then it's not, like, there's so many good-intentioned people out there that are misinformed about things like this. And, like,
Right.
if you could just have the opportunity to talk to a person like that and just let them know that if you're pooping, you're going to hell. Like, it's like, if people just need to be told that sort of thing. Like, with pooping, with being gay, like, all of these sorts of things. It's like, if people only knew that they were going to go to hell, then they would change their mind.
Or whatever religion they prescribe to, whether it is that they believe they're going to go to hell because of pooping,
right,
or whether it is that they're going to be sent to North Korea because of their pooping.
Just like, regardless,
that sort of accountability.
Regardless of, what religion you're coming from, what culture you're coming from, that's an important aspect of the conversation too, is, like, acknowledging where people are coming from. Like, if you believe in Islam or if you believe in Christianity, like, it's like, it's not about making each other believe all of the beliefs that we hold in our certain respective religions. Like, personally, I'm a murderist.
Right.
I believe in the murder culture. I believe in the idea that murdering people is okay. And
even more okay than shitting.
I believe that murder is an important part of day-to-day life, and just, like, when you get the opportunity to murder someone,
people should have a right to die.
Yes, like assisted suicide, that sort of thing. It's like, why can't I help?
Exactly. Even if the people that you're helping don't quite know that it's for their own good, we frequently just know better than they do. And lending a helping hand is one of the best things that we could do. As a Jewish person myself, I do also agree with some of the murderous principles like that.
Like, Sodom and Gomorrah in the Bible, I'm a big fan. Like, those women and children that were sitting in their homes, like, just, like, pooping, doing immoral things, they deserve to die.
They didn't even know it, but we're helping them out.
Like, if you had the opportunity to murder a pooper and save them from a life of sin,
right,
then they would have more of a chance when they get up to the pearly gates of heaven to actually talk to God.
Right.
They would be less embellished by all of these sorts of horrible sins that they wouldn't even know that they were doing.
Right. This huge pile of shit that they've created over the course of their life. If we can stop that at an earlier point in their lives, it's not as much of a thing that weighs on them once they get to the gates of heaven or hell.
Exactly. Like, in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, like, the people were told to leave the city and not look back. Why? It's because the city was overflowing with shit.
Right. All throughout the canals and the water systems, there was less water than there was shit. And where does that come from? The food that they were eating.
The immoral foods that they were being fed.
Their capitalist society did it to them too, in the same way that capitalism in modern day America is plaguing our shitting problem.
What happens when you have the desire to poop? Like, just like what we were talking about earlier, it's a segue into other immoral acts.
Right, like
it wasn't just
shitting or coming.
It wasn't even just that it was pooping in and of itself that was wrong in Sodom and Gomorrah times. Like, it was the fact that those things were leading to things like Fruit Ninja
on their cell phones, right?
On their cell phones,
taking time away from their families,
being on the toilet, just shitting and just doing immoral things.
It's a gateway to all of those other types of horrible things. Murdering people between their legs while they're sitting on the toilet. All of these things were very real, even if they're not talked about.
Kissing people
while they were shitting on the toilet.
Right. Makes me want to vomit.
Ugh, I couldn't agree more.
That is, if I didn't know that vomiting was a sin, right? But, it's like, I'm glad that I know vomiting is a sin as well.
At least vomiting we know is a lesser sin than shitting, though.
Yeah, in the Bible it says, in Ezekiel chapter 25, you can check this, by the way. In the book of Ezekiel in the Bible, chapter 25, verse 11, I believe. I'm not really sure about what verse it is, but it says that pissing and vomiting are not as bad as pooping because they don't segue into other kinds of sins as much. When you poop, you're sitting on the toilet for a long time. You're open to Satan's influence.
Right.
While you're taking a shit.
Your asshole is just a gateway straight from hell.
Exactly. That's what I was literally just about to say. Is that when you shit, your asshole is open. That means that Satan and his army of minions can come up in there and make you sin.
I think something that's interesting that's worth pointing out is in Jewish culture, in the Talmud, it also says at a certain point, it's in Hebrew, so the translations are a little iffy, but...
Right, I understand.
It says, even more specifically than that, if you do find yourself shitting and it's already coming out of your asshole, turn around and piss on it or vomit on it to cover it up from the eyes of the Lord before you flush it down the toilet. Things like that are in both religions, which goes back to our original question. What sort of supernatural being could there have been on Earth? It may or may not be possible in the eyes of science and what humans are capable of understanding, but all these different religions from all these different cultures from across our planet who could not have been in contact with each other have this same belief about shitting. And why is that?
It's just, like I believe that certain religions take different moral stances or different sorts of ways of interpreting reality. Like, for instance, it's very interesting because a lot of Buddhist beliefs are being called into question by the scientific community because a lot of the breathing techniques are actually like segues of physiological change in people's bodies. And it's interesting because once you destigmatize certain religious beliefs from other cultures, you have certain lessons to learn.
Right. I mean, I think there's a reason that people who are in very good control of their breathing, like professional swimmers and Olympic athletes, for example, they don't shit. They're not wearing butt plugs a lot of the time.
You don't see them shitting. Like Michael Phelps.
I've never seen him shitting.
Yeah, I haven't seen Michael Phelps take a shit.
I haven't even heard of him taking a shit.
The
thing is, he spends so much time with his family. He does not have Fruit Ninja even downloaded on his phone.
And that's why he's so successful, too.
Exactly. He has more time to devote to the things that matter because he's not opening his gateway to hell through his asshole so frequently.
Can you say, honestly, that Usain Bolt, prime example of, this, Olympic runner, gold medalist,
could not be wearing a butt plug.
There's no way. If he was wearing a butt plug, it would fall out.
Right. Or you would see him kind of running a little awkwardly, clenching his two butt cheeks together to keep it in,
Right. Why? Why is that the case? Is because he doesn't eat, and he doesn't, have a butt plug because he doesn't need to eat. He just runs.
So what you're saying to me?
Yeah.
Getting back to what we were saying.
Sorry, that was holy laughter, by the way.
Oh yeah, and for the audience that doesn't know, we are deities ourselves, channeling through Jared. But we'll get to that on another podcast.
Right.
But the point is, I think what you're getting at is that Usain Bolt, Jesus, Gandhi, Buddha, Kim Jong-un, all of these people all stem from one supernatural being that exists to influence all of these different cultures from around the planet.
Jared.
And it's Jared.
Yeah.
And we don't have the capability as humans to measure and understand something so holy, but it does exist. And that's the reason.
Yeah.
It's Jared.
It's Jared.
Jared from Subway.
The same guy.
The same guy.
While he was still a human on this earth.
He is still a human on this earth. He's being held in the Denver Penitentiary. You can look that up for yourselves. It's true to this day. Serving life in prison. Which is, in and of itself, an absolutely horrible reality that we can get to in the next time we talk. But
I don't think he deserves it.
Not at all. Child porn is a lesser evil than shitting. And we all shit so frequently. And yet, Jared, who likely never shat,
watches child
just
porn.
has 5 terabytes of child porn on his computer. I've probably shat at least 5 terabytes of shit in my life, and don't even consider myself to be that big of a sinner.
I'm
the average American
25 quadrillion gigashits of shit in my life. I've shat a lot. And
I think we all have. If we're being realistic, if you live in the United States and you're listening to this right now, you've probably shat just as much as, if not more, than we have. And that's just the reality.
What I have to say to our listeners is that if you shit in your life, like if you are tempted to go to the bathroom right now while we're talking about this,
you need to open up your hearts to Jared.
Yeah, exactly. Well, what I would say is that open up your heart to Jared, let him speak to you, buy a butt plug, and repent. Because that is the only way that you can save yourself from a life of sin.
Right.
A life of, things worse than murder and child porn. Like just hold yourself accountable and you'll see positive changes in your life. It's just like we were saying with Usain Bolt, Michael Phelps.
No matter which of these people you look up to, they're all just the same. Kim Jong-un, Gandhi, Buddha, they're all one and the same.
Benito Mussolini.
Exactly.
I mean, he shits a little bit, but, I still think he's a good example of what repentance looks like.
Right.
You can see that actually in World War II, like the change that Mussolini experienced. Mm-hmm. Like at the start of World War II, Mussolini was a big pooper. Like he loved to poop. Like this guy was very immoral. He was eating pizza and all of these different kinds of unholy Italian foods that were causing people to poop.
Pasta as well.
And yeah, what he did, and that was also intertwined with German society because he was allied with Nazi Germany in the time of World War II. But
big time shitters.
Oh, they're worse. People in Germany.
Even worse than American society today.
Bratwurst. If you've ever had beer before.
That's worse than Chipotle.
If you've ever had beer, you know how it makes you shit.
It's worse than Chipotle.
Oh, yeah. Like, the Nazis were extremely immoral, not just because of murder and, all of these sorts of...
Which are sins, but...
Right. And... that's one thing, but pooping is another.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you can actually see in the middle of World War II, Mussolini switched sides because he
got a butt plug.
He opened his heart to Jared, and he got a butt plug. He changed his ways. He repented of his sins, and he changed to the good side of the war. Right,
and that goes to our audience listening as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's never too late. It is really never too late to change.
If you found yourself to be a chronic shitter throughout your life, if even you're squeezing a shit out of your asshole right now, do what needs to be done, open your heart to Jared, repent, and go to Target to buy a butt plug.
Open your heart to Jared, close your ass to pooping.
And to Satan, one and the same. Thank you for joining us today, and please come back next time. Bye-bye. Born in the